The sun had just begun to peek over the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow through our bedroom window. I stretched, feeling the pleasant ache of sleep leaving my body, and glanced over at Sharon. She was already up, humming softly as she moved about the kitchen. The smell of freshly brewed coffee and sizzling bacon drifted up the stairs, pulling me out of bed. I headed downstairs, the creak of the old wooden steps a familiar sound. The kitchen was bathed in the soft morning light, and Sharon was standing at the stove, her back to me. She was wearing that old blue robe I loved, the one that always made her look so cozy and approachable. I walked up behind her and wrapped my arms around her waist. "Morning, love," I murmured, resting my chin on her shoulder. "Good morning," she replied, turning her head to plant a quick kiss on my cheek. "Coffee's ready and breakfast will be in a minute. How'd you sleep?" "Like a log," I said, letting her go and grabbing a mug from the cabinet. Couldn't have asked for a better night. She smiled, a touch of pride in her eyes. "Glad to hear it. I've got a busy day planned for us. Thought we could start with a walk in the park, then maybe check out that new bookstore downtown." I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the rich, comforting flavor. "Sounds perfect. You know how much I love our morning walks." We chatted about our plans for the day as we ate breakfast. The usual topics came up: the latest news, what we needed to pick up from the store, and our schedules for the week. Sharon had a way of making even the most mundane conversations feel special. Her laughter was infectious, and her eyes sparkled with a warmth that made everything seem brighter. After breakfast, we got ready for our walk. The park was only a few blocks away, and it had become a cherished part of our routine. As we strolled through the leafy paths, hand in hand, we talked about our dreams and aspirations. Sharon shared her latest idea for a garden project, and I told her about the new business deal I was working on. "You always have the best ideas," I said, squeezing her hand. "I can't wait to see how the garden turns out." She beamed at me, her eyes shining with excitement. "And I can't wait to hear more about your new deal. I know it's going to be a big success." We walked in comfortable silence for a while, enjoying the beauty of the park and the simple pleasure of being together. The birds chirped happily in the trees, and the air was crisp and fresh. It was one of those perfect mornings that felt like it could last forever. As we headed back home, I couldn't help but feel a deep sense of contentment. Life wasn't always easy, and we'd had our share of challenges, but moments like this made it all worthwhile. Sharon and I were a team, and together, we could face anything. Back at the house, we settled into our respective routines. Sharon tended to her garden while I caught up on some paperwork for the stores. The sun climbed higher in the sky, and the day unfolded with its usual rhythm. But at the back of my mind, I held on to the warmth of that perfect morning, a reminder of the love and happiness that filled our lives. Work was a whirlwind of activity as usual. My convenience store chain was thriving, and today was an important day. I had a meeting scheduled to finalize the acquisition of a small gas station owned by the Flanagans, an elderly couple looking to retire. This deal would not only expand my business, but also secure our financial future. I arrived at the Flanagans' quaint little office early, my mind buzzing with anticipation. The walls were adorned with old photos and awards, a testament to their years of hard work. Mr. Flanagan greeted me with a firm handshake and a warm smile. "Good to see you, Mark," he said, motioning for me to sit. "Hope the drive wasn't too bad." "Not at all," I replied, taking a seat across from him. "I'm just glad we're finally getting this deal wrapped up. How's Mrs. Flanagan?" "Oh, she's doing well," he said, chuckling. "She's already planning our first vacation in years. Somewhere warm, she insists." We shared a laugh, the kind that comes easily between two people who've built a good rapport. Mrs. Flanagan entered the room, carrying a tray with coffee and cookies. "Hello, Mark," she greeted me warmly. "I hope you're ready for some of my famous chocolate chip cookies." "Always," I said with a grin, taking a cookie from the tray. "Thank you, Mrs. Flanagan." She patted my shoulder affectionately before leaving us to our business. Mr. Flanagan pulled out the contract from his briefcase, laying it on the table between us. "Everything's in order," he said, tapping the papers. "We've gone over the terms, and we're ready to sign." I nodded, glancing over the contract one last time. It was a fair deal, one that would benefit both parties. I picked up the pen, my hand steady as I signed my name. Mr. Flanagan followed suit, and just like that, the deal was sealed. Congratulations, he said, shaking my hand again. You've got yourself a fine business here. Thank you, I replied, feeling a sense of accomplishment. I promised to take good care of it. We chatted for a bit longer, discussing the transition and what to expect in the coming weeks. The Flanagans were clearly relieved and excited about their retirement plans. I couldn't help but feel happy for them. They deserved this. As I drove back to my office, I couldn't stop smiling. The deal had gone smoothly, and I felt a surge of pride. This acquisition would not only enhance my business, but also provide new opportunities for growth. I was eager to share the news with Sharon. When I walked into the house that evening, Sharon was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. She looked up and smiled when she saw me. How did it go? She asked, wiping her hands on a dish towel. It went perfectly, I said, wrapping my arms around her. The deal is done. The Flanagans are officially retired, and we've got a new gas station. She hugged me tightly, her excitement matching mine. That's wonderful, Mark. I'm so proud of you. Thanks, love, I said, kissing her forehead. We should celebrate. How about we open that bottle of wine we've been saving? Sounds like a plan, she said, her eyes twinkling with joy. I'll get it from the cellar. As we sat down to dinner, the clink of our glasses echoed in the cozy kitchen. We talked about our plans for the future, dreaming about the possibilities that lay ahead. It was a perfect evening, one that filled me with a deep sense of gratitude. Here's to new beginnings, I said, raising my glass. To new beginnings, Sharon echoed, her smile as bright as the future we were building together. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a profound sense of contentment. The deal was more than just a business transaction, it was a step toward a brighter future for us. And with Sharon by my side, I knew we could face anything that came our way. I pulled into the driveway a little earlier than usual, excited to share the day's success with Sharon. The deal with the Flanagans had been finalized, and I couldn't wait to celebrate with her. The house looked peaceful in the fading light of the evening, a picture of suburban tranquility. As I walked through the front door, a strange silence greeted me. Usually, Sharon would be bustling about, either in the kitchen or tending to her garden. But today there was an unsettling stillness. I called out her name, my voice echoing through the empty house. Sharon, I'm home. No response. I felt a pang of unease as I made my way upstairs to our bedroom. The sight that awaited me stopped me cold. Sharon's closet was half empty, her clothes and personal items missing. A sinking feeling settled in my stomach. On the bed, a note lay propped against her pillow. My hands trembled as I picked it up and read. Mark, I'm sorry. I need some time to think about our future. I've taken a few things and gone to stay with a friend. Please don't try to contact me for a while. I hope you understand. Sharon. I sat down heavily on the edge of the bed, the words blurring before my eyes. Sharon had left. The perfect morning we had shared just yesterday seemed like a distant memory. I reread the note, trying to make sense of it. Why had she left so suddenly? What did she mean by think about our future? I wandered aimlessly through the house, the silence pressing in on me. In the kitchen, the remnants of our breakfast were still on the counter, a stark contrast to the emptiness I felt inside. I picked up my phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. Sharon, it's me. Please call me when you get this. I'm worried about you. I hung up, feeling a mix of anger, confusion, and sorrow. I needed answers, but more importantly, I needed to know she was safe. The next morning, I went to work in a daze. My employees noticed my distraction, but I brushed off their concerns with forced smiles and vague reassurances. My mind kept returning to the note and the empty closet. Something didn't add up. Sharon and I had our differences, but we always talked things through. This sudden departure was completely out of character for her. During a break, I called her best friend, Laura, hoping she might know something. Laura, it's Mark. Have you heard from Sharon? She left a note, and I'm really worried. There was a pause before Laura replied, her voice hesitant. Mark, she's here with me. She just needs some time to sort things out. She's safe, I promise. Can I talk to her? I asked, relief mingling with frustration. She's not ready to talk yet, Laura said gently. Give her a few days, okay? I thanked Laura and hung up, feeling a bit better knowing Sharon was safe. But the uncertainty gnawed at me. What had driven her to leave so abruptly? That evening, I went through our finances, hoping for some clue. It didn't take long to notice the irregularities in our joint account. Large sums of money had been withdrawn recently, amounts that didn't match our usual expenses. My unease grew. What was Sharon doing with all that money? I needed to know the truth. I decided to dig deeper, starting with her phone records. Using the store's security system, I accessed her call history and saw the frequent calls to Steve Riley, a competitor. My heart sank. Was Sharon involved with him? Determined to find out, I hired a private investigator. I couldn't confront her without solid evidence, and I needed to know the extent of her actions. The next few days were a blur of work and worry. Every ring of the phone made my heart race, hoping it was Sharon. Finally, the investigator called with the confirmation I dreaded. Sharon had been meeting with Steve Riley regularly. The betrayal hit me like a punch to the gut. The woman I loved, the woman I thought I knew, had been lying to me. I sat in my office, staring at the investigator's report, my mind reeling. Sharon's note had been the tip of the iceberg. Now I had to confront the painful reality that our marriage was built on lies. The perfect morning was a distant memory, overshadowed by the unexpected homecoming that had shattered my world. As I closed the report, a sense of determination settled over me. I would confront Sharon with the truth, but I would also protect what was mine. Our marriage might be over, but my life wasn't. I would rebuild, one step at a time, starting with facing the woman who had torn my world apart. The days that followed Sharon's departure were a blur of confusion and heartache. I moved through my daily routine like a ghost, barely aware of my surroundings. My mind kept circling back to the investigator's report and the unanswered questions about our life together. It was time to confront Sharon and get the truth. One evening after closing of the store, I sat in my office, staring at the photos the investigator had given me. Images of Sharon with Steve Riley, their faces too close, their smiles too intimate. My heart ached, but I knew I had to face her. I needed answers, and I needed them now. I dialed Laura's number again, hoping she could convince Sharon to talk to me. Hello, Laura? It's Mark. I need to see Sharon. Please, it's important. There was a pause before Laura answered, her voice wary. Mark, she's been through a lot. Are you sure you want to do this now? Yes, I'm sure. I need to know the truth. Can you tell her to meet me at our house? Tonight? I'll let her know, Laura sighed. But please, be gentle with her. I thanked her and hung up, feeling a mix of dread and determination. I headed home, the weight of the coming confrontation heavy on my shoulders. I couldn't predict how Sharon would react, but I knew we needed to face this together. Sharon arrived an hour later, looking nervous and weary. She stepped into the living room, her eyes avoiding mine. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. Sharon, sit down. We need to talk. She nodded, taking a seat on the couch, her hands fidgeting in her lap. Mark, I'm sorry. I never wanted to hurt you. I sat across from her, the investigator's report in my hands. Sharon, I've seen the pictures. I know about you and Steve. Her face paled, and she looked away, tears welling up in her eyes. I didn't mean for it to happen. It just did. I was lonely, Mark. You were always so busy with work. My anger flared, but I kept my voice steady. Lonely? Sharon, we've always talked about everything. Why didn't you tell me you were feeling this way? She wiped at her eyes, her voice trembling. I tried, but it felt like you weren't listening. And then Steve was there, and he made me feel. Noticed. The betrayal cut deep, but I needed to understand. So, you took money from our account to be with him. She shook her head, sobbing. No, it wasn't just for him. I needed time to think, to figure out what I wanted. I'm sorry, Mark. I know I've hurt you. I looked at her, feeling a mix of sorrow and frustration. Sharon, we could have worked through this together. Instead, you chose to lie and sneak around. How can I trust you now? She met my gaze, her eyes filled with regret. I don't know. I've made so many mistakes. I just want to make things right. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of her words hanging between us. I felt a flicker of hope, but also a deep sense of loss. Our marriage might be salvageable, but it would never be the same. I think we need some time apart, I finally said. We both need to figure out what we want. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. I understand. I'm so sorry, Mark. I really am. I know, I replied, my voice softening. But sorry isn't enough. We need to rebuild trust, and that will take time. She stood up, looking defeated. I'll stay with Laura for now. Take care of yourself, Mark. I watched her leave, the door closing behind her with a finality that felt like the end of an era. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty room. The confrontation had given me some answers, but it had also left me with more questions about our future. As the night deepened, I realized that this was just the beginning of a long journey. Rebuilding trust would be hard, and there were no guarantees. But for now, I had to focus on myself and the path ahead. The evidence of her betrayal was clear, but the way forward was still uncertain. Only time would tell if we could find a way back to each other. The days after our confrontation were some of the hardest I'd ever faced. The house felt empty without Sharon, and every corner seemed to remind me of her. Our laughter, our conversations, our shared dreams. It all felt like it had been built on a lie. I knew I had to find a way to move forward, but the pain of betrayal was a constant weight on my shoulders. I spent my days buried in work, trying to distract myself from the heartache. My employees noticed my distant demeanor, but I couldn't bring myself to explain. The business was thriving, but my personal life was in shambles. One evening, as I sat in my office going over some paperwork, my best friend Tom dropped by. He was one of the few people who knew the whole story. He knocked lightly on the door before walking in, a concerned look on his face. Hey, Mark, he said, taking a seat across from me. How are you holding up? I sighed, leaning back in my chair. I've been better, Tom. It's been rough. Tom nodded, his expression sympathetic. I can't imagine what you're going through. Have you talked to Sharon since the confrontation? I shook my head. No, we agreed to take some time apart. She's staying with Laura. I don't know if I can ever trust her again. Tom leaned forward, his eyes serious. Trust is hard to rebuild, but it's not impossible. Do you still love her? The question caught me off guard. I sat there, thinking about everything we've been through. Despite the betrayal, a part of me still loved Sharon, but love alone wasn't enough to fix what was broken. I admitted, but love isn't the issue. It's the trust that's shattered. How do you come back from something like this? Tom gave me a thoughtful look. You take it one day at a time. If both of you are willing to put in the work, there's a chance to rebuild. But it's going to be tough, and you both need to be committed to it. I sighed again, feeling the weight of his words. I just don't know if I have the strength for it. Every time I think about her with Steve, it feels like a knife in my heart. Tom reached over and placed a hand on my shoulder. Take your time, Mark. Don't rush into any decisions. You need to heal, and that won't happen overnight. After Tom left, I sat alone in my office, contemplating his advice. I knew he was right, but the path ahead seemed daunting. The next few weeks were a blur of work and restless nights. I avoided social gatherings, not wanting to face the questions and pity from friends and family. One evening, I found myself at the local bar, nursing a drink and lost in thought. The bartender, Jake, had known me for years. He approached with a concerned look. Rough night, Mark? He asked, setting another drink in front of me. Something like that, I replied, swirling the glass in my hand, just trying to clear my head. Jake nodded knowingly. Sometimes a good drink helps, but talking about it can be even better. I looked at him, considering his words. Ever had your heart broken, Jake? He chuckled softly. More times than I care to admit. But you learn to pick up the pieces and move on. It's never easy, but it's possible. We chatted for a while, Jake sharing stories of his own heartbreaks and the lessons he'd learned. His words were a comfort, a reminder that I wasn't alone in my pain. As I walked home that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe Tom and Jake were right. Maybe, just maybe, there was a way to rebuild my life and find happiness again. The next morning, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. I decided to take things one step at a time, starting with a visit to a therapist. I knew I needed help to navigate the emotional turmoil and find a way to heal. Therapy sessions were tough but enlightening. I learned to confront my feelings, to understand the depth of my pain, and to start the process of forgiveness. It wasn't about forgiving Sharon immediately, but about finding a way to let go of the anger and resentment that were eating me up inside. One evening, after a particularly intense session, I sat down and wrote a letter to Sharon. I poured my heart out, expressing my hurt, my anger, and my lingering love. I didn't know if I would ever send it, but writing it down felt like a step toward healing. As the days turned into weeks, I began to see a glimmer of light at the end of the tunnel. The road to recovery was long, but I was slowly finding my way. Trust might have been shattered, but I realized that it could be rebuilt, one small step at a time. In the end, it wasn't just about Sharon and me. It was about finding myself again, rebuilding my life on a foundation of honesty, and learning to trust not just others, but myself as well. And as I stood on that path to healing, I knew that no matter what the future held, I would be okay. The decision to attend the business conference in Dallas came at a time when I needed a change of scenery. The opportunity to network, learn new strategies, and simply get away from the daily reminders of my broken marriage was too good to pass up. It felt like the perfect chance to clear my head and focus on the future. I boarded the early morning flight, the hum of the plane a soothing backdrop to my thoughts. As the city disappeared beneath us, I felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. Dallas was a world away from my everyday life, and I was ready for whatever it had to offer. The conference was held at a sprawling hotel in the heart of the city. The lobby buzzed with activity, and I felt a spark of energy as I checked in and received my name badge. I spent the first day attending seminars, soaking up knowledge from experts in the field. It was refreshing to be surrounded by people who shared my passion for business. That evening, I joined a networking event in one of the hotel's grand ballrooms. The room was filled with entrepreneurs, all eager to connect and share their stories. I made my way to the bar, ordering a drink to steady my nerves. As I sipped my whiskey, a man about my age approached and introduced himself. "Hey there, I'm Jim," he said, extending his hand. "Mind if I join you?" "Not at all," I replied, shaking his hand. "I'm Mark. Nice to meet you." We chatted about our businesses, discovering we had a lot in common. Jim owned a chain of restaurants, and we exchanged stories about the ups and downs of managing multiple locations. "So, what brings you to Dallas?" Jim asked, genuinely curious. "I needed a break," I admitted. "Things have been tough at home, and I thought this conference would be a good distraction." Jim nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I get it. Sometimes a change of scenery is exactly what you need, gives you a fresh perspective." We spent the rest of the evening talking and laughing, sharing ideas and experiences. It felt good to open up, even just a little, to someone who understood the pressures of running a business. By the time I returned to my room, I felt lighter, as if some of the weight I'd been carrying had lifted. The next day, I attended a workshop on digital marketing. The speaker was engaging, and I took pages of notes, eager to implement new strategies in my stores. During a break, I struck up a conversation with a woman named Lisa, who owned a small chain of boutiques. "Have you been to many of these conferences?" she asked, her eyes bright with enthusiasm. "A few," I replied, "but this one has been the most insightful so far. How about you?" "It's my first," she admitted with a laugh. "I was a bit nervous, but it's been amazing. So many great ideas to take back home." We shared our thoughts on the sessions we'd attended and exchanged business cards. It felt good to connect with like-minded people, to be part of a community that understood the challenges and rewards of entrepreneurship. That evening, Jim and I met up again for dinner. We found a cozy restaurant a few blocks from the hotel, and as we sat down, the conversation turned more personal. "So what's been going on at home?" Jim asked gently. I took a deep breath, the familiar ache returning. "My wife and I are separated. She had an affair, and it's been hard to deal with." Jim nodded, his expression sympathetic. I'm really sorry to hear that, Mark. That's tough. Yeah, I said, my voice tight. But this trip has been good for me. It's given me a chance to think about what I want and how to move forward. Shin raised his glass. Here's to new beginnings, then, whatever they may be. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against his. As the week went on, I felt a growing sense of clarity. The conference sessions were enlightening, but it was the conversations and connections I made that truly helped me see a path forward. By the time I boarded the plane back home, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. Back in my office, I started implementing the strategies I'd learned. The changes brought a fresh energy to the stores, and my employees noticed the difference. More importantly, I felt different, stronger, more hopeful. One evening, as I was closing up, I received a text from Sharon. It was simple, just a request to talk. For the first time since she left, I felt ready to have that conversation. I didn't know what the future held for us, but I knew I could face it head on, thanks to the journey to Dallas and the new beginnings it had inspired. And so, with a deep breath, I texted her back, agreeing to meet. Whatever happened next, I knew I was ready. Ready to rebuild, to move forward, and to embrace whatever came my way. The drive to the park felt surreal. It had been weeks since Sharon and I last spoke, and now we were meeting to discuss our future. My heart pounded as I parked the car and walked towards the bench where we had agreed to meet. The autumn leaves crunched under my feet, and a cool breeze rustled the trees. Sharon was already there, her back to me, staring out at the small pond where ducks were lazily gliding across the water. She looked up as I approached, offering a tentative smile. "Hi, Mark," she said softly. "Hi, Sharon," I replied, sitting down beside her. "Thanks for meeting me." She nodded, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. "I've missed you," she admitted. I looked down at my hands, trying to find the right words. "I've missed you too, Sharon. But things have changed. We need to be honest with each other if we're going to move forward." She took a deep breath, her voice trembling. "I know. I've done a lot of thinking, and I realize how much I've hurt you. I'm so sorry, Mark." "I appreciate that," I said, my voice steady. "But apologies aren't enough. We need to rebuild trust, and that's going to take time and effort from both of us." Sharon nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. I love you, Mark. I don't want to lose you." I felt a lump in my throat as I looked at her. "I love you too, Sharon. But we can't just go back to how things were. We need to create something new, something better." We sat in silence for a moment, watching the ducks on the pond. The world seemed to slow down, giving us a brief respite from the turmoil of our emotions. "I've been seeing a therapist," I finally said. "It's helped me understand my feelings and how we got here. I think it might be good for us to see someone together." Sharon nodded eagerly. "I've been thinking the same thing. We need help to navigate this." A sense of relief washed over me. It was a small step, but it felt like progress. "Let's take it one day at a time," I said. "No pressure, just honest communication and effort." "Agreed," Sharon said, her voice firmer now. "I want us to work through this, Mark. I'm committed to making things right." We stood up, the cool breeze swirling around us. As we walked back to the parking lot, I felt a cautious optimism. The road ahead would be challenging, but we were taking the first steps toward healing. In the following weeks, Sharon and I started attending couples therapy. The sessions were tough, filled with raw emotions and difficult conversations. But with each session, we began to understand each other better. We learned to communicate more openly, to express our fears and hopes without judgment. One evening, after a particularly intense session, Sharon and I went for a walk in the park. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the landscape. We walked in comfortable silence, our hands occasionally brushing against each other. "Mark," Sharon said, breaking the silence, "do you think we can really make this work?" I stopped and turned to her, looking into her eyes. "I do, Sharon. It won't be easy, but I believe in us. We've come this far, and I'm willing to keep trying if you are." She smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile. "I am. I'm in this for the long haul." As we continued our walk, I felt a sense of peace. The wounds of the past were still there, but they were beginning to heal. We were building something new, something stronger. And for the first time in a long while, I felt hopeful about the future. Back at home, I made dinner while Sharon set the table. It was a simple meal, but it felt special because we were sharing it together. As we sat down to eat, the atmosphere was light, filled with laughter and easy conversation. So, Sharon said, raising her glass to new beginnings. To new beginnings, I echoed, clinking my glass against hers. As we finished our meal, I realized that this was just the beginning of our journey. There would be more challenges, more tough conversations, but we were facing them together. And that made all the difference. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I held Sharon close, feeling a sense of contentment. The path ahead was uncertain, but we were taking it one step at a time together. And that was enough. In the darkness, Sharon's voice broke the silence. Thank you, Mark, for giving us a second chance. I kissed her forehead, my heart full. Thank you for fighting for us. We'll get through this one day at a time. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. The future was bright, filled with the promise of new beginnings and the strength of a love that had weathered the storm.